As we showed you before the break, a neighborhood north of downtown Houston pushing for a so-called Civility Ordinance in hopes of reducing crime. Dozens of residents of the near North Side neighborhood have signed a petition. The regulation prohibits sitting, laying, or sleeping on sidewalks from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. The proposed zone encompasses the Salvation Army shelter where the suspected killer of 11-year-old Joshua Flores is believed to have stayed prior to the murder. The city currently has several Civility Ordinance zones, but opponents say the plan is unfairly targeting the homeless. So that's our topic this half hour, and we want to hear from you on our Fox 26 Facebook page. You can also weigh in on Twitter. Just send us a tweet at Sally Mack, Fox 26. Joining us live in the newsroom is our panel led by our senior legal analyst, Chris Tritico, Democratic media consultant, Mustafa Tamiz, and Republican strategist and public policy analyst, Jackie Bally. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, the city's been trying, residents have been pushing for a while now. They say there's drugs, there's prostitution. Is this something that can be enforced, and how does this work?
So before we get to that, I have to just announce that the best university in Texas is 6-0 after beating up on the Christians from Abilene.
That's pretty good.
And will be #1 in the country next week after their polls come out. So there you go. That's
Sam Houston State. You have to say the university, Chris.
Everybody knows the best university in Texas. Undefeated, the only major university in Texas undefeated, Nate Griffin. All right, so there you go. Listen, these ordinances, cities have tried to do these ordinances all over the country. It gets challenged on First Amendment grounds and other constitutional grounds as to whether or not you can penalize and criminalize people who are homeless, and that's really where the fight is, and where we fall, Mustafa Tamiz, is can you criminalize someone who doesn't have a job for not having a home?
Well, what you run into basically is the needs of the residents, right, versus the same old argument of not in my neighborhood. Like, you got to put these type of centers in places somewhere, but most people don't want them in their neighborhood. But the upside to this discussion is that I think there's some strong leadership in the neighborhood with the city councilman Cisneros there.
Carlos
Cisneros, who does a great job, and a number of other issues, the near North Side Management District that's there. So I think this is probably a good place to have this discussion and to have both sides kind of weigh in, and we're likely to get a better outcome because of it.
This is the neighborhood where Jose Flores was killed, and I certainly understand the charged feelings in that neighborhood, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be penalizing people who just don't have a job.
So if we didn't have this ordinance or any other ordinance, and we didn't ask for an increase of policing in that area, then we would complain as constituents and say nothing's being done. So the city is trying to be proactive. The reason why you have
it's a neighborhood being proactive, not the city.
The ordinance has to come through the city. So the reason why the people who oppose the ordinance are having issues with it is because there are several other ordinances, such as you can't feed more than 5 homeless people in a row without a permit. Homeless people cannot collect money for playing music like you see in other cities, and other ordinances, 3 or 4 ordinances that specifically target the homeless. So people are saying in conjunction with those, there's an issue. There is a committee that's being formed to look at these ordinances and make a recommendation to the mayor and to the city council members for changes, as you always see in charter policy changes in other areas. So I think the city is being very proactive by trying to raise awareness. I think the fact that the community is saying, look, this is a problem, we're going to propose this, and I think the city will look at it as a whole and try to combat the problem.
At some point it becomes too much, doesn't it? I mean, you can't feed them, you can't stay on the sidewalk, you can't sleep here, you can't stand here. At what point do you say?
But I think, look, I think the model that the city put together to reduce and somewhat eliminate homelessness amongst the veterans is what we need to go after. I mean, the chronic homelessness can be solved if we work together, and a lot of the stuff that gets in the way of that is panhandling and vagrancy, because many of those folks need to find permanent solutions. And so when we just kind of hand money at the sidewalk, which makes us feel good, but perpetuates the problem.
All right, let me go to Sally. She's monitoring our social media.
Okay, there's actually a Facebook group devoted to this issue for Northside residents. As we take a look at one of the posts on that Facebook group from Diana, she says this community has never been hostile to the homeless, and she goes on to say it's the idea that it's okay to come to our community and openly do drugs, sell and buy them, expose yourselves. She goes on, and then at the end there, she says this doesn't remove the homeless, but it is asking them to be active in going to centers that provide proper help rather than sleeping and loitering during those certain hours, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m.
You know, I was in Los Angeles last summer, and I was stunned to see these blocks and blocks and blocks of tent cities where the streets are lined with tents, and they have an ordinance there that you can have your tent on the street, but you can't be in it during the daylight hours. And it was stunning to me to see these tents, but nobody was in them during the daylight. And I asked somebody about it, and they said they can stay there all day long, but when the sun comes up, they have to leave.
Yeah, again, the city and the community is being very proactive about the problem. I think another thing that we're going to see that they're going to be looking at is how to combat the mental problem, because a lot of the people we know who are homeless have mental issues, and we've heard that the city council address that before. We heard the county judge address that before.
We have less than 30 seconds. The problem with the mental illness, it doesn't start with the city, it starts with the state, where we are probably last in the nation for funding.
Well, and because of that, that 1 out of 4 people in our jails has a mental health issue, and so when people come out of that jail, they end up on the streets, and it becomes a vicious cycle. We have to solve these problems, yes, at the state level, because it boils down to funding, and without additional revenues, it becomes our local problem.
Yes, all right, but they have to work with city officials to solve this problem.
All right, we got to leave it right there. We'll be back in about 15 minutes with another really good topic.
Okay, we're going to talk about the election and the scandals plaguing it coming up in about 20 minutes. We'll see you then.